I remember the river that ran behind my childhood home, its surface smooth and dark, almost mirror-like under the pale glow of the moon. Fog would drift low across the banks, curling around the reeds and rocks like it was alive, hiding things I didn't dare name. On nights when the wind was still, the only sound was a faint hum of insects and the occasional rustle of leaves. But sometimes there was something else, something just beyond the edge of sight, glimpsed for a fraction of a second before it vanished. I'd hear the water shift unnaturally, or see a shape crouch too still to be a deer, too deliberate to be a shadow. My parents warned me never to go too far, but curiosity has a way of bending fear. One evening, drawn by the silver light reflecting off the river, I followed a narrow trail into the fog. The forest seemed to inhale around me, quiet in my own breath, until I froze at the sound of a low, wet thud behind me. That's when I saw it. The fog sat low over the river tonight. It smelled damp, earthy, with a hint of something older. The reeds shivered as a faint wind slid through them, though nothing moved. I leaned closer to the water. The surface hummed, soft, almost a whisper beneath the lapping ripples. I thought I heard voices. Not words, not quite language, just murmurs curling through the fog. A shape brushed past the reeds. Quick, impossible to track. I blinked and it was gone, but the hush it left lingered on my skin. The pale light appeared without warning. It flared across the river, a ghostly wash over the black water. I squinted, hoping to catch it. Something more, something solid. A glimpse, just a flicker. It moved like smoke, fluid and wrong. I couldn't tell where it began or ended. My breath caught. Even the reeds seemed to pause, holding their rustle. I stepped closer to the bank. The mud sank softly underfoot, damp, cool. The hum followed me, winding tighter, curling around my chest. It wasn't threatening, not in a way I could name. It was waiting. A shadow leaned from the far bank, pale as fog, blurred. I blinked. It darted. Then nothing. Only the water, calm, the reeds, silent. The voices swelled, faint, layered, a thread of static in the quiet. I wanted to call out. I wanted to name it, but my lips wouldn't move. A small wave licked the shore. It carried a smell I didn't recognize, briny, metallic, old, and the shape returned. Not fully, not clearly, a suggestion of limbs, of eyes, gone again before I could be certain. I sank to the grass, letting the mist settle on my arms. It was soft against my skin, but heavier on my mind. The hum under the water pulsed, a rhythm I could not follow. It pulled at the edges of thought. Something scraped the reeds. I froze, waited. The sound stopped. The silence stretched thick, and I realized my heartbeat was too loud. I felt the fog pressing closer now. Cool, damp. It brushed my cheeks, dampened my hair. The murmurs grew thin again, like breath escaping through cracked walls. I could no longer tell if the shapes belonged to the river or something beyond it. The pale light flared one last time, and I saw it clearly, just for a heartbeat. A creature, maybe, or just an absence shaped like one. Its eyes, or what felt like eyes, glimmered briefly, unreadable. Then it slipped back into the river's sigh. The hum lingered. The reeds rustled. I stayed still, letting the fog crawl over my shoulders. There was no need to move. Nothing demanded it. I realized I did not want to leave. Not yet. The water whispered. The reeds whispered. The creature, whatever it was, whispered. And I wanted to hear more. I stayed until the fog thinned, though the voices never truly left. The pale light faded into memory. And even as I walked away, the soft, damp hum followed. It waits, always waiting, just beneath the surface. The forest felt heavier tonight. Damp earth pressed against my boots. The air smelled of moss and decay, faint, sharp. I stopped before the oak. Its trunk stretched higher than I could see, branches curling like dark fingers. The forest quieted here. The usual rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, gone. It was as though the trees swallowed sound. I crouched closer. The bark was rough, cold under my palms, and there were faint scratches, tiny, almost deliberate. New marks from last night, or the night before. I couldn't tell. The hollow at its base drew my gaze. A cavity shaped like eyes, dark and wide. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw pupils. Almost human. Watching. I froze, letting the shadows settle over me. A leaf shivered above. No wind. Another. And another. Rustling, soft, patient. The air tasted damp, metallic, like something old stirring beneath the soil. I stepped back. The scratches traced upward along the trunk, climbing toward the crown. Each tiny line seemed to move with the wind I couldn't feel. A slow pulse ran through the oak, subtle, like it breathed beneath the bark. I leaned in again, closer to the hollow. Eyes, or the suggestion of them, glimmered faintly in the dark. The space inside seemed too deep, stretching farther than the tree's girth should allow. It held me, still, quiet, uncomfortable. A shadow shifted at the edge of my vision. A branch, perhaps, or not. I couldn't be sure. Even my own heartbeat felt loud, unnatural. The forest around me waited. Time slowed. The tree loomed patient, endless, and I felt the scratches crawl beneath my fingernails. They were not just in the bark. They were in the air, in the hum that threaded between the trees. I pressed my ear to the trunk. The hollow whispered, not words, not language, just a breath, a soft inhale, curling through the wood. It made my skin tingle, cold and alive. Leaves rattled again. Still no wind. I could hear them brushing one another, dancing with an unseen hand. Something moved inside the hollow, a flicker of movement, a glint that could have been eyes, or the reflection of the pale moonlight. I stepped away. The forest exhaled with me. The scratches seemed to wink in the dark, watching. The hum lingered, soft and endless. The oak swallowed my footsteps. Each step echoed briefly, then vanished. It was alone and alive, patient, patient. I stayed near it until the cold pressed against my bones. The hollowed eyes never blinked, never looked away. The rustling continued, quiet, persistent. And when I finally left, I carried the memory in my chest, a pulse beneath the ribs, a hum under the skin. The oak waited, always, silent, still, endless. The morning fog lay heavy over the forest floor. It clung to branches, curled around my boots, soft and damp. The air smelled of wet pine and cold earth, sharp with dew. It moved differently here, not like wind-blown mist, but with purpose. A shape stretched in the haze, then vanished when I blinked. I stepped carefully over roots slick with moisture. Twigs snapped behind me. The forest held its breath. No wind, no animals. Yet something followed. A shadow drifted ahead. A figure, pale, almost human, flickering with the fog. I wanted to see it clearly. The closer I moved, the less it was. Edges softened, dissolved into air. The fog thickened. It wrapped around the trees, pressed against my face, cold and wet. I could feel it on my skin, clinging to hair, sliding down my neck. A hum ran through it, subtle, vibrating against my chest. I froze. The snapping continued. Soft footsteps or twigs breaking under weight I could not see. I dared not turn. The mist shifted behind me, brushing my shoulder. A form rose in front, tall, wrongly shaped. It shimmered with each movement, but had no substance. I want to call out. The breath stuck in my throat. It vanished before I could, then reappeared further along the path. The fog pulsed, ebbing and swelling like it breathed with me. The forest smelled damp and decayed. Leaves glistened, dripping water onto the soil. Each drop sounded impossibly loud in the quiet. And the mist moved again, curling around me, almost playful, or patient, watching. I pressed my hands to the bark of a nearby tree. Rough, solid, a moment of grounding. The mist responded, stretching toward me, thin and silver. I shivered. Something touched my sleeve. Not hard, just a brushing, cold, insistent. I turned. Nothing. Only fog. Only movement where there should have been none. The figure returned. Now closer. Its edges blurred. The shape suggested limbs, a torso, a head. Eyes? I thought I glimpsed them, dark and hollow. Gone as soon as I tried to focus. I kept walking. Twig snapped behind me. Soft footsteps, never matching my pace. I smell wet earth, pine, and something faintly metallic. A presence pressing, though I cannot see it clearly. The fog thinned near the clearing. Light touched the tips of leaves, pale and hesitant. The figure lingered at the edge, then dissolved entirely. A whisper of movement, nothing more. I stopped. The forest was quiet. The fog still clung to the earth, still shivering in unseen currents. I could feel it, cold against my skin, alive in a way that made my chest tighten. I walked slowly out of the mist. Every step echoed softly, fading as the fog receded. And still, the sense of being watched stayed with me. A patient presence waiting in the haze. I turned back once. Nothing, only the fog, curling, moving, as if it had learned to breathe on its own. And I knew it would wait, always just beyond reach. The river lay quiet this morning. Mist curled above the water, thin and pale. The air smelled of mud and wet stone, sharp with cold. I stepped onto the bank. The ground was soft, giving slightly underfoot, and then I saw them. Footprints. Not mine. Not anyone's I could recognize. Fresh impressions in the damp earth, leading along the water's edge. I crouched closer. The mud was cool against my palms. Each step pressed into the ground with perfect weight. But no one had walked here. Pale pools had formed in the depressions. I leaned over. Small points of light reflected back at me. Eyes. Tiny, deliberate, staring from the shallow water. I held my breath. The river hummed quietly, carrying the fog along its surface. The eyes did not blink. They waited, patient. A ripple ran across the pool. Nothing visible moved. And yet, the feeling of being watched pressed against my spine. A soft, subtle shift in the shadows along the bank. I could feel it even before I saw it. I traced the footprints with my fingers. Cold, soft, almost imperceptible. The mud clung, leaving residue under my nails. The eyes followed my movements, glimmering in the pale light. A leaf drifted down, landing in one of the pools. The reflection rippled. And for a second, I thought the eyes were moving, circling, adjusting to me. I wanted to leave, but my feet remained planted, glued by curiosity and unease. The river sighed along the stones. Mist coiled around my boots. The footprints ended abruptly at the water's edge. No further marks. No indication of where they had gone. I stepped back. The pools held their reflections. Still staring. The hum of the river grew faint, threading into my chest. The air felt thicker here, heavy with something unseen. I turned my head. Shadows shifted along the bank. Not fast, not violent. Just deliberate. Watching. The fog swirled at the edges of my vision. I could smell damp earth and something faintly metallic, like water touching rusted stone. The footprints seemed to pulse under my gaze. The eyes followed, waiting. I walked along the bank slowly, soft mud yielding under each cautious step. The reflections shifted, barely, as if alive. And every time I glanced up, the sense of being observed returned, stronger. I stopped at the last footprint. The river mirrored the sky, pale and indifferent, but the eyes in the pools, they lingered. A small, subtle movement beneath the surface, and I felt it, a quiet, persistent presence. I left the bank as the fog lifted slightly. The footprints remained, shallow depressions in the earth, and the eyes, they waited, patient, silent, watching, always watching, even when I could no longer see them. Twilight draped the riverbank in a pale, fading light. The reeds swayed softly, though no breeze touched them. The air smelled damp, sharp with mud, with water curling into the edges of my nose. I stepped closer to the edge. The ground pressed cool against my boots. A hum lingered through the fog, low, insistent, winding around the reeds. Then I saw them, two pale eyes, blinking slowly, deliberate. They watched from the darkness between the stalks. I turned my head. Nothing. The reeds trembled as if breathing. The eyes had vanished, yet the whispers remained. Soft, circular, curling around my ears like wind I couldn't feel. I crouched lower, closer to the water. The mud was slick under my hands, cold and heavy. The hum pressed against my chest. And there, Blink, the eyes returned, just for a fraction of a second. I froze. The air felt thick, damp, electric. The reeds brushed my arms. Whispers circled, impossible to locate, always behind me, ahead, beside. I leaned into the darkness. The eyes shifted, tracking me without moving. A shape suggested itself, but each time I focused, it blurred, fading like mist. A soft rustle behind me. I dared not turn. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet stone. The reeds pressed closer, as if listening, leaning toward the unseen presence. I stepped along the bank. My boots sank slightly in mud, clinging with each movement. The eyes blinked again, further down. Always ahead, always gone when I tried to reach them. The fog thickened. I felt it crawl along my neck, my arms, cold and damp. The whispers lingered, curling between the reeds, winding around my senses. Soft and insistent, patient. I stopped at a small clearing. The river reflected the last of the twilight, pale and still. The eyes were not there, but I knew they were somewhere watching. The reeds continued their subtle sway, though no wind stirred. Every movement felt deliberate, a silent communication I could not understand. The whispers pressed closer, circling endlessly, playful and patient. I stayed near the edge, letting the darkness settle. The water reflected the fog, the reeds, the quiet. The eyes blinked once more, far away, and then they vanished. I turned fully, scanning the darkness. The whispers lingered, the reeds moved, the fog clung. I could feel the presence of those pale eyes without seeing them. Patient, waiting. I stepped back from the water. The air felt lighter, though the hum remained under my ribs. The river sighed quietly. The eyes were gone, or perhaps they never left. And I walked on, carrying the memory with me. The whispers, the subtle sway of reeds, and the feeling of being watched at every turn. The moon hung low over the river. Its pale light brushed the fog, making it glow softly. The air smelled of wet earth, cold stone, and something faintly sweet I couldn't place. The mist swirled at my feet. Shimmers danced across the surface. Shapes that didn't belong. They twisted and elongated, folding in on themselves like smoke. I stepped closer. The mud pressed against my boots, cool and damp. Each step stirred whispers from the fog, subtle shifts that vanished as I leaned in. A form flickered in the pale haze. It shimmered, then stretched and bent, impossible, delicate. I wanted to see it clearly. The closer I moved, the more it dissolved, slipping between what was real and what I imagined. The river hummed faintly, a vibration under the water, under the fog. I reached out with my hand. The mist brushed my skin, wet and cold, like liquid shadow. It slid along my fingers, leaving a tingle in its wake. The shapes shifted again, brighter now, shimmering in patterns that suggested limbs, but no solidity. A pulse ran through the fog, slow and deliberate. It pulled at the edges of my vision, teasing. I inhaled, the fog thick and heavy in my lungs. A soft metallic scent threaded through it. The shimmers danced closer, not threatening, but insistent, guiding me forward. I followed. The ground underfoot sank slightly, clinging to boots, releasing tiny sprays of mist with each step. The river reflected the moon, fractured by the moving haze. And the whispers followed, curling around my ears, always just out of reach. A shadow flickered in the distance. It bent unnaturally, and I felt my chest tighten. But it did not approach. It simply shimmered there, patient, waiting. I pressed forward, hand grazing the fog. It was damp, cold, electric against my skin. The shapes shimmered, dissolving into one another. I could sense them more than see them. The river sighed quietly, small ripples touching the bank. The fog pressed closer, brushing hair and cheeks. The shimmer stretched across the mist, dancing slowly, deliberately, like a secret in motion. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. The moonlight poured over the fog, pale and trembling. The shapes held still for a moment, then dissipated, leaving only the soft hum of mist. The whispers lingered, curling, fading, wrapping around the trees, around the river. I could feel the pulse under my ribs, quiet, steady, patient. The shimmer had vanished, but the memory remained, hovering in the fog, in the air, in the hum beneath everything. I stepped back from the clearing. The ground clung damply to my boots. The fog wrapped itself gently around my shoulders, cold but not cruel, and I knew it would wait, always just beyond reach. The river stretched pale under the moonlight. Mist clung to its edges, curling between reeds and rocks. The air smelled damp, heavy with rot and river weed. I approached the dock. The wood groaned softly, though no one had stepped here in years. Rotting planks sagged under their own weight, shadows pooling beneath them. The river moved deliberately, too deliberately. It shifted around the pilings, as if hiding something just below the surface. I leaned closer, letting the cold seep through my boots. A faint hum ran beneath the water. It threaded into my chest, subtle, steady, patient. I pressed my palm to the dock. The wood was slick with damp, splintered, soft in places. The shadows pooled darker here. Shapes gathered at the edges, impossible to define. I thought I glimpsed limbs, fleeting and wrong. The dock creaked again, slow, deliberate, like a sigh. I crouched at the edge, listening. The water whispered against pilings, brushing them with a careful persistence. A smell of brine and decay reached my nose, sharp and clinging. I imagined movement beneath the surface, deliberate, waiting. I stepped forward slowly. The dock shivered underfoot, groaning at weight it had not borne for years. Shadows stretched along the planks, dark and patient. Each breath I took seemed louder than the last. The river rippled, though there was no wind. Something beneath shifted just beyond my vision. A shimmer moved under the moonlight, brushing the surface of the water. I could feel it watching, though it remained unseen. I sank to the dock, letting my hands trace the wet wood. The texture was rough and damp, pressing into my palms. The hum beneath the water continued, threading through the fog, curling into my senses. The shadows pulled closer, though they did not move. A small wave lapped against the pilings. It left a metallic tang in the air. I imagined eyes in the darkness beneath the dock, observing, patient, unreadable. I stayed there, letting the silence settle. The dock groaned again, soft, almost like a warning. The water rippled deliberately, hiding something I could not see, and I felt a presence there, waiting, patient, quiet. I stepped back slowly, boots pressing into mud at the bank. The shadows remained, pooling beneath the rotting wood. The hum lingered, fading only slightly. The dock waited, and the river waited with it. Even as I walked away, the memory pressed against my chest. The smell of wet wood, the subtle creaks, the deliberate movements beneath the water. I knew the dock would remain, patient, always, watching, waiting. The forest pressed close tonight. Leaves shimmered in the pale light, moving though no wind stirred them. The air smelled damp, earthy, and faintly metallic. I stepped carefully along the path. The ground yielded softly under my boots, cold and slick with dew. The rustling followed me, curling between trees, lingering in every shadow. I froze. A hum pulsed through the air, low and steady, almost animalistic. It pressed against my chest, wrapping around my ribs. A branch shifted. No wind moved it. I could feel a presence behind every tree, watching, patient, silent. I leaned closer to the undergrowth. The leaves pressed against my palms, damp and trembling. The hum threaded through the forest, subtle, insistent, like breath in the dark. Shadows stretched across the trunks. They moved oddly, bending, elongating, curling in impossible ways. I could hear soft shifts, small disturbances in the ground. The hum pulsed again, faster, almost teasing. I dared not turn my head. The feeling followed me. Pressure behind my eyes, a gaze I could not escape. The forest seemed to breathe in rhythm with me. I could smell the damp decay of fallen leaves, and something faint, coppery, in the air. A leaf drifted across my boots. Another, and another. The rustling never stopped, though the wind was absent. I stepped forward slowly. The hum throbbed beneath my feet, threading through the roots. Shadows pooled between the trees, moving just beyond recognition. Soft, deliberate, watching. I crouched near a fallen log. Its bark was rough, cold, and moist. The rustling pressed closer, curling around my arms. The hum wrapped tighter around my chest. I breathed slowly. The forest seemed endless, every tree a sentinel, every shadow alive. The rustling continued, faint, patient, teasing my senses. I stepped back, careful not to disturb the ground. The hum lingered, vibrating faintly beneath the soles of my boots. The leaves shimmered again, though the air remained still. I moved along the path, keeping my gaze ahead. The forest pressed its presence against me from all sides. The rustling wound around me, soft, deliberate, insistent. The hum threaded into the silence, almost comforting, almost dangerous. I stopped at a small clearing. Shadows pooled at the edges, still and patient. The leaves trembled, though the air was motionless, and I realized the forest itself was alive with quiet intent. I walked on slowly, leaving the clearing behind. The rustling followed, the hum lingered, wrapping itself around the trees, the path, the damp air. I carried the tension in my chest, a pulse that matched the soft, deliberate rhythm of the unseen. And even as I left the forest behind, I felt it with me, the soft rustling, the low, animalistic hum. Patient, waiting, always watching. Night fell completely over the forest. The moon hung pale, filtered through thick clouds. The air smelled damp, earthy, faintly metallic. Silence settled, absolute. No rustle of leaves, no call of birds. Only my breath, shallow, uneven, then scraping. Soft, deliberate, almost hesitant. It came from somewhere ahead, just beyond reach. I froze, letting the air press against my skin, cold and still. Shadows pooled along the trees. I could feel a presence, patient, watching. Something crouched in the darkness. Still, unmoving, I stepped forward slowly. Twigs resisted beneath my boots, pressing soft and wet. The scraping paused. The figure did not move, but I could feel its gaze pressing into me. The fog curled between trees, thin and insistent. It brushed my face, damp and cool. I could smell the forest, sharp with wet leaves and soil, and something else, something coppery, metallic, near. I dared not breathe too deeply. Each step seemed louder than the last. The scraping began again, soft, deliberate, shifting closer. The figure remained crouched. Eyes, if they existed, were hidden in shadow, but I could sense them, patient and deliberate, following, a presence that made my chest tighten, my skin crawl. I stopped. The air felt thick, heavy, pulsing with subtle intent. The fog wrapped around my shoulders, cold and damp. I could hear my heart beat, steady and loud, and it seemed the creature matched it, perfectly still beside the rhythm. A branch snapped in the distance. The figure did not react. It stayed crouched, silent, impossible to read. Only the scraping continued, soft and infrequent, curling around my senses. I leaned slightly forward, trying to see more. The fog shimmered, revealing the outline of its body, thin, crouched, wrong in shape. I could not discern more. Edges blurred into darkness, dissolving like smoke. I stepped back slowly, careful not to startle it. The scraping ceased. Only the hum of the forest remained, low and subtle, threading beneath the silence. I waited, breath shallow, listening. The figure remained, crouched, watching, patient, unmoving. The fog pressed against my face, damp and cool. The forest exhaled around us, slow and deliberate. I could feel the presence, even as I stepped away. Its gaze followed me, quiet, intense, eternal. I left the clearing, keeping my step soft, every muscle tight with awareness, every sense alert. The scraping had stopped, but the memory lingered. The creature waited in the darkness, silent, patient, watching. Even now I can feel it, somewhere in the shadows, always crouched, always waiting. The riverside path lay quiet under the pale moonlight. Mist curled along the water, thick and damp. The air smelled of wet earth and moss, sharp with cold. I walked slowly, my boots pressed into soft mud, leaving shallow prints behind. And then I saw them, footprints, large, too wide to belong to any known animal. They appeared in the mud as though laid by an invisible hand, and then vanished. I knelt closer, running my fingers along the edges of the impressions. Cold mud clung to my skin, soft and damp. The air felt heavier here, thick with something unseen. A subtle hum threaded beneath the quiet. I stood and continued along the path. New footprints appeared ahead, always just far enough to draw me forward. They were deliberate, patient, impossible. The river rippled beside me, moving too slowly, too deliberately. Each step I took seemed echoed by something unseen. I could feel it following, tracing me, lingering. The fog pressed against my face, damp and cold. The footprints shimmered in the pale light, edges fading into nothing. I wanted to reach them, touch them, understand them. But each time, they dissolved before my fingers could meet them. I listened. No rustle of leaves, no animal calls. Only my breath, shallow, uneven. And beneath it, a subtle vibration in the ground, as if the path itself pulsed beneath my feet. I followed the trail. The footprints twisted, looping, vanishing and reappearing further along. Each step quickened my heartbeat. I could smell the river, the mud, and something faintly metallic lingering in the air. Shadows stretched long across the banks. I imagined eyes in them, patient, unblinking. The footprints pulled me deeper along the path. A soft sense of being observed pressed against my spine. I crouched by a fresh set of prints. The mud was wet, cold under my palms. The shapes were wrong, unnatural. I felt curiosity and unease mingle, twisting inside me. A breeze, or maybe not, stirred the mist. The footprints had vanished again. And yet, I could feel them lingering, a presence moving just out of reach. I walked on slowly, careful, alert. Each step pressed into the soft earth, leaving my own prints that seemed fleeting in comparison. The path hummed beneath me. The river moved deliberately beside me. I stopped at the edge of a small clearing. The moonlight painted the footprints faintly across the mud, and for a moment, I felt a strange connection to whatever had left them. Patient, persistent, waiting. I stepped back. The fog swirled around my boots, curling and thick. The footprints vanished once more, but the memory of them lingered, pulling at my senses. The hum, the cold, the river, the path. And I knew they would always return. The river lay still beneath the pale moonlight. Mist curled along its edges, cold and damp against my skin. The air smelled of wet stone and mud, sharp and metallic. I knelt at the water's edge. The surface shimmered, reflecting the sky, the trees, the fog. And then, something else. A pale reflection stared back at me. Not my own. It mimicked my movements perfectly, yet felt wrong, off, distant. The water rippled faintly under its gaze, cool and teasing against my palms. I leaned closer. The reflection lingered, watching me with intent. Each blink I took, it mirrored. Each breath, it echoed. I reached out, hand hovering above the water. The reflection shifted slightly, mimicking the motion before I touched it, and then it vanished. The river was calm again. Only my breath, slow and shallow, filled the quiet. I stepped back, cold mud clinging to my boots. The fog pressed against my face, damp and electric. The reflection returned a moment later, faint and shimmering, in a place I had not expected. I crouched again. It mimicked me, movements delayed by fractions of a second. Eyes, pale and unreadable, reflected back. The air hummed faintly, threading through my chest, vibrating in the stillness. I moved closer, heart tightening. The reflection followed, always one step behind or one step ahead. Impossible to predict. The water licked at the riverbank, cold and wet, brushing against my hands. I froze. The fog thickened, curling around my shoulders, pressing damp and heavy. The reflection held still for a heartbeat, then shimmered, breaking apart like smoke over the surface. I dared a hand to touch it. The water met my fingers, smooth, cold, unbroken. And yet, the reflection was gone. Only ripples remained, and the soft hum beneath the silence, threading through the mist. I leaned closer again. It appeared once more, distant, almost teasing. I mirrored its stance. It mirrored mine. And then, just as suddenly, it dissolved into the fog, leaving only the river's pale, indifferent surface. I stepped back fully, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The reflection lingered in memory, faint, teasing, unreal. The mist pressed closer, wrapping around my chest and shoulders. I could still feel its presence, patient, observing. I turned to leave the riverbank. The water shimmered faintly under moonlight, calm once more. But I knew it waited there, always in the reflections, in the fog, in the silence, watching. Even as I walked away, the river followed with its quiet hum. The pale reflection lingered, just beyond perception, patient, surreal, waiting. Fog rolled thick tonight. Clinging to the riverbank, it pressed against my skin, damp and cold. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. I walked slowly, boots sinking softly into mud. Shapes shifted in the fog, just beyond recognition. And then I saw them, eyes, glowing faintly, suspended in the haze. They tracked me silently, patient and unreadable. Some seemed close, brushing the edges of my perception. Others lingered far away, just beyond reach. I froze. The fog curled around my arms, wrapping damp and tight. The hum of the river pulsed faintly beneath the silence. Every step felt heavier, every breath shallow. A shadow shifted near a tree. The eyes blinked, or I thought they did. Movement felt impossible to judge, near and far at once. The fog disoriented me, twisting distance and direction. I leaned forward, letting the mist press against my cheeks. The glow of the eyes flickered, teasing, retreating, advancing. I could feel their attention pressing into my chest, cold and deliberate, like a hand on my shoulder that wasn't there. I stepped backward. The mud clung to my boots, wet and stubborn. The eyes followed, patient, disembodied, unblinking. I could hear the faint rustle of unseen creatures, deliberate and slow. The fog thickened, swallowing the path behind me. Shadows pooled between the trees. I could feel presence in every direction, unseen, moving just beyond my vision. The eyes glimmered, reflecting pale light, impossible to pinpoint. I crouched by the riverbank, pressing hands into the cool, damp soil. The hum of the water threaded through the fog, wrapping around my senses. The glowing eyes lingered, floating, observing, patient. I could smell wet leaves and moss, metallic tangs threading faintly beneath. I leaned closer to the fog. Some eyes vanished. Others appeared in new positions, always watching, always waiting. The disorientation pressed into me, soft and unrelenting. I walked slowly, careful, deliberate. The eyes trailed me through the mist, patient, unreadable. Distance became meaningless. Near and far merged into the fog, leaving only their silent, luminous attention. I stopped at a clearing. The fog pressed against my shoulders, damp and heavy. The eyes glimmered, hovering between shadow and mist. And then, one by one, they receded into the haze. I stayed still, listening to the faint hum, the rustle of unseen shapes, the cold press of fog against my skin. Even as I stepped away, the memory lingered. The eyes, patient and disquieting, always waiting somewhere in the fog. Tracking, watching. The forest was still tonight. Mist hovered low over the undergrowth, damp and thick against my skin. The air smelled of wet moss and decaying leaves, sharp and earthy. A hum rose from beneath the soil. Low, steady, vibrating. It pressed against my chest, subtle, unnerving, almost imperceptible at first. The trees swayed slightly. No wind moved them. Branches rubbed together softly, scraping against one another, but no breeze stirred the leaves. I pressed my hand against a tree trunk. It vibrated faintly under my palm. The hum threaded through my bones, subtle, insistent, impossible to ignore. I stepped forward slowly. The forest seemed alive with motion I could not see. Shadows shifted between trunks, folding in the fog, patient and silent. The hum threaded through the mist, curling around my chest, squeezing softly. The ground beneath my boots felt alive. Soft tremors pulsed through the mud and leaf litter. Every step seemed to echo, though no sound traveled. The hum matched my heartbeat, vibrating in rhythm with the unseen. I crouched near a cluster of ferns. The leaves quivered, though the air remained still. I could feel the vibration press against my skin, damp, cold, and insistent. The forest held its breath, silent but attentive, I leaned closer to the base of a tree. Its bark pulsed subtly beneath my fingers. The hum seemed to grow, threading through the roots, the soil, and the fog. Every nerve in my body tense against it. I stepped back, boots sinking slightly into wet earth. The fog curled around my ankles, damp and insistent. The hum persisted, patient, steady, vibrating to the ground in my chest. Shadows pulled along the trunks. They did not move, and yet I felt their attention. The vibration grew stronger, subtle, deliberate, pressing into me. A presence, unseen, patient, insistent. I pressed my palms to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. The hum threaded through my ribs, my bones, soft but undeniable. The trees swayed slightly again, without wind, in rhythm with the low vibration. The forest itself seemed to pulse beneath my feet. I walked slowly forward, careful not to disturb the earth too sharply. The fog swirled around my boots, damp and cold. The low hum threaded through the silence, patient, deliberate, unyielding. I stopped at a small clearing. The mist pressed against my shoulders. The trees shivered subtly, and the hum lingered in my chest. Silent, patient, impossible to ignore. Even as I left the clearing, the low vibration remained, threading through the fog, the forest, the earth. Every step I took carried it with me, soft, unnerving, persistent. And I knew it waited, always patient, always humming, beneath the stillness. The forest edge lay quiet under the pale moonlight. Mist curled along the trunks, damp and clinging to my skin. The air smelled of wet soil and decaying leaves, sharp and cold. Shadows stretched long across the undergrowth, unnatural, elongated. They shifted slightly, independently of the trees and rocks that cast them. I stepped forward slowly. The fog pressed around my ankles, cold and insistent. Every shadow seemed to wait, patient and deliberate, hovering at the edge of perception. The ground beneath my boots was soft and wet. Each step pressed deeper into mud and leaf litter, but the shadows did not move with me. They lingered, elongating, shifting subtly, watching. I crouched near a fallen branch. The mist wrapped around my shoulders, damp and heavy. The shadows stretched across the forest floor, bending impossibly, edges wavering like smoke. I could feel their presence pressing into me, patient, silent. I leaned forward, careful, curious. The shadows did not follow my movement. Instead, they shifted independently, elongating toward me, then retracting just as subtly. The air hummed faintly, threading through mist, vibrating against my skin. I stepped back, boots squelching softly in the mud. The shadows stretched further, always at the edge, hovering between visibility and disappearance. The fog pressed closer, curling around my ankles and wrists. A branch creaked somewhere nearby. The shadows did not react, but I felt their awareness, patient, waiting, deliberate. It pressed into my chest like a weight I could not lift. I leaned closer to a tree trunk. Its bark was cold and damp beneath my fingers. The shadows pulled around it, elongating across the forest floor, edges flickering like faint static. I could smell wet moss and decay, sharp in the fog, threading into the heaviness of the night. I moved slowly forward. Each step carried the sense of observation, patient and unrelenting. The shadows shifted subtly, bending toward me and away at the same time. Their movements were independent, yet deliberate, almost sentient. I stopped at a small clearing. The fog pressed against my shoulders, damp and cold. The shadows lingered at the edges, waiting, patient, unnatural. The silence pressed in, heavy, unbroken. I could feel them even without seeing them fully. Patient, watching, waiting. The fog wrapped around my chest, heavy and damp, pressing against my senses. And then, slowly, I stepped back, leaving the clearing, but the shadows lingered, patient, waiting, always at the edge of perception. Even as I moved further into mist, the memory remained. The shadows, elongated and unnatural, waiting just beyond reach. Silent, patient, unyielding. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Mist curled low over the undergrowth, damp and cold against my skin. The air smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves, heavy with night. I felt it first as a chill, a sudden brush against my neck, soft, fleeting. like breath, cold and deliberate, passing over my skin. I turned slowly. Nothing. Only fog and shadow, dense and still. The sensation lingered. Cold tendrils pressed lightly against my nape. I could feel in my bones, threading through my spine, subtle and impossible to shake. I stepped forward cautiously. The fog pressed around my ankles, heavy and damp. The trees shivered faintly, though no wind stirred their branches. I froze. The chill returned, brushing my shoulder this time. No shape, no presence. Only sensation, patient, deliberate, unnerving. I crouched near a moss-covered trunk. The cold pressed against my neck again, slow and steady. It seemed to follow, tracing invisible paths along my skin. I could smell wet moss and decay, sharp and metallic in the stillness. I leaned closer to the earth, hands pressed into damp soil. The fog curled around my wrists and shoulders. The chill lingered, brushing across my skin, impossible to locate. I stepped back, boots sinking softly into the mud. The trees loomed in pale moonlight. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the forest floor, silent, still. And still, the cold breath pressed against me, patient, insistent. I turned slowly in a circle. The fog shifted with me, curling and twisting like smoke. Everywhere I looked, nothing moved, yet the sensation remained. Cold, deliberate, impossible to escape. I pressed my palms to my chest, steadying my breath. The chill threaded through my ribs, my neck, my shoulders. The forest held its breath. The fog pressed closer, dense and damp, curling over every sense. I moved carefully forward, step by step. The sensation lingered at the edge of perception, patient, unnerving. It brushed against my skin as though it belonged to the forest itself. Silent, inescapable. I stopped at a clearing. The fog wrapped around my ankles and wrists, damp and cold. The chill lingered, brushing my neck again, fading and returning with each heartbeat. I could feel it lingering, patient, deliberate, invisible. I took a final step back from the clearing. The fog pressed against my shoulders, heavy and cold. The sensation remained at the edge of my awareness, a patient, spine-chilling presence, waiting, watching, and I knew it would follow, always at the edge, unseen but undeniable. The old dock sagged over the water, with dark and slick with damp. Moonlight glinted off the river's surface, pale and fractured. The air smelled of wet wood, algae, and cold night mist. I crouched at the edge, peering beneath the rotting planks. Shadows pooled in the dark water. Ripples moved slowly, deliberately, though nothing emerged. A faint shift stirred beneath the surface. Something alive. I could see the water curve unnaturally around it, as if it refused to be revealed. I leaned closer, breath shallow. The fog pressed against my skin, cold and damp. A hum of unseen motion threaded through the stillness. I thought I saw a shape move, a glimmer of pale reflection, slipping back into the darkness. It never fully emerged, always hiding, always patient. The dock creaked under my weight. I froze, listening to the subtle pull of water against the pilings. Every ripple, every shadow seemed deliberate. I pressed my fingertips against the damp wood. The cold seeped into my skin, threading up my arms. The water shivered under the dock again, unnaturally, and the shape beneath it moved just enough to make me hesitate. I leaned forward, heart pressing against my ribs. The fog wrapped around my shoulders, chilling and thick. Ripples shimmered, as though something breathed beneath the surface. Eyes could be anywhere, or nowhere. A low vibration threaded through the dock and water, subtle, insistent. I could feel it in my chest, pushing against my ribs. I drew back slightly, breath fogging the cold air. The shadow under the dock remained still, yet I knew it was aware of me, patient, deliberate, and hidden. I crouched closer again. Water rippled slowly, unnaturally, as though the creature beneath it tested the boundaries of its hiding. A hint of movement, then nothing. The dock creaked again. I stayed still, feeling the vibration in my bones, damp mist brushing my skin. Ripples shivered across the surface, echoing the unseen motion beneath. I could smell river mud, algae, and cold, wetwood, sharp and metallic in the night. The shape beneath the dock never revealed itself fully. Just enough motion to tease my curiosity, just enough presence to press against my awareness. I stepped back, boots sinking into the wet soil at the riverbank. The fog pressed close around me. The water lay still again, black and endless beneath the dock. But I could feel it there, patient, waiting, hidden, just beneath the surface, always moving, always watching, even as I move away into the cold mist of the night. The reeds swayed in the pale light of dusk. Fog curled low over the riverbank, damp and thick against my skin. The air smelled of wet grass and river mud, heavy with evening chill. A sound drifted softly through the mist. A whistling, high, melodic, impossible to place. I leaned closer, breath shallow. Each note seemed deliberate, delicate, yet deliberate in its pull. It tugged at my senses, drawing me deeper into the reeds. The fog pressed against my ankles as I stepped forward, cold and damp, clinging. The reeds whispered and bent around me, forming strange, shifting patterns in the mist. The melody changed, rising and falling like a living thing. It was soft, almost sorrowful, yet insistent. I felt the pull in my chest, a gentle insistence that urged me forward. A rustle behind me made me pause. The reeds were silent again, still watching. The melody resumed, curling around my senses, threading to the fog and the damp air. I walked slowly, boots sinking softly into wet soil. The reeds seemed to lean closer, bending with the invisible wind of the whistling. Each note echoed against the fog, a delicate vibration that brushed my skin. The melody shifted again, weaving a path before me. I could see pale shapes in the fog, swaying just beyond reach. The whistling seemed to circle, drawing me in, soft and hypnotic. I crouched near the riverbank. The fog pressed against my shoulders, cold and thick. The reeds whispered around me, notes rising and falling, pulling me deeper into their subtle, haunting rhythm. I took a tentative step forward. The melody pulsed through the fog, through the ground beneath my feet, through the damp brush of leaves against my arms. It was alive, patient, insistent. A branch creaked nearby. The reeds did not stop. The whistling threaded around my senses, gentle yet impossible to ignore. I could smell the wet reeds, sharp and earthy, curling into the fog. I stepped again, drawn, cautious. The reeds leaned, swayed, whispered, and called. The melody wound through the fog like smoke, curling around my ankles, pressing lightly against my chest and shoulders. I stopped in a small clearing, fog swirling thickly around my boots. The whistling was louder here, closer, intimate. It brushed against my ears, tickled my skin, lingering at the edge of perception. I turned slowly, tried to locate the source. There was nothing but the swaying reeds and the curling fog. Yet the melody persisted, patient, haunting, and impossible to escape. The wind did not move. The reeds did not rustle beyond their melody. Yet I could feel the pull of it, insistent, delicate, leading me further into the quiet mystery of the riverbank. I took a final step, leaving the clearing behind. The whistling trailed, fading slowly into the mist. The reeds stood silent once more, but the melody lingered in my senses, patient and haunting. A whisper of the unseen, calling, always calling. The forest path stretched ahead, narrow and slick with evening dew. Fog curled between the trunks, cold and damp against my skin. The air smelled of wet leaves, earth, and something faintly metallic. I walked slowly, boots sinking softly into the soft soil. Shadows pressed against the edges of the trail. Every rustle of leaves made my chest tighten. Then, a blink, two small, pale eyes reflected in the darkness of a tree trunk. I froze, breath shallow, heartbeat pressing against my ribs. I stepped closer. The eyes vanished. Only the rough bark remained. A faint hum of movement lingered around me. I turned my head, thinking I'd see them in the underbrush. Nothing. And yet, I felt it, a presence moving just beyond the edge of vision. The fog shifted around the roots and fallen leaves. Shadows pulled in unnatural shapes. Each blink of movement, gone when I looked directly, made the forest feel alive. I pressed my fingertips against the cold trunk. Moisture seeped into my skin. The eyes appeared again, higher, watching, patient, unblinking. Then gone. My footsteps felt too loud, yet no answer came. No crack of twig, no rustle beyond what I caused. Still, the sensation of being followed pressed into my shoulders. I inhaled sharply. The scent of wet moss and fallen pine filled my nostrils. Every step forward was met with a blink somewhere else. Always watching, always just out of reach. The trail narrowed further. Fog clung to my legs like cold silk. A soft vibration hummed beneath my feet, subtle, insistent. I looked back. Nothing. Then, from the corner of my eye, a flicker of pale light. Eyes in the underbrush. Blink. Gone. I stopped listening. The forest was alive with silence. Every rustle felt deliberate, as if the air itself was watching. I moved again, cautiously. Eyes followed, shifting, hiding, teasing. The hum of the forest seemed to echo in my chest, a presence neither near nor far, but always there, patient and unseen. The path curved, fading into thicker fog. I took a slow breath, feeling the chill wrap around my neck. The eyes blinked once more in the shadows, then vanished, leaving only the fog, the hum, and my own uneasy heartbeat. I walked onward, unsure if I was being led or merely drawn by the quiet dread curling around me. The forest seemed endless. The eyes, always watching, remained lingering just beyond perception. The river lay still under the pale glow of moonlight. Fog drifted across the surface, curling in slow, cold tendrils. The air smelled of damp earth and riverweed, thick and heavy. I stepped closer to the bank. The mud squelched softly beneath my boots. The water rippled, though there was no breeze to move it. A dark shape shifted just beneath the surface, gone before I could focus. Only a fleeting shadow, fluid and deliberate, lingering at the edge of vision. I crouched, breath shallow, fingertips grazing the cold, wet soil. The water moved again, unnaturally smooth, as if something beneath it was aware of me. The fog pressed closer, damp and cold against my cheeks. I smelled river water, earthy and metallic, curling into the mist. The shape appeared again, slightly closer, then vanished, leaving only small concentric ripples fading into stillness. I leaned over the edge. Reflected moonlight danced across the surface, silver and pale. The water seemed deeper here, darker than it should be, and something moved just beneath it, silent, deliberate. My chest tightened. A faint vibration traveled up through my boots from the wet soil. The river hummed, low, subtle, impossible to place. It was watching. I was certain of it. A cold breath of air curled across my neck. I shivered. The fog seemed thicker, heavier, hiding something waiting. The dark shape shifted again, slow, almost languid, moving just beneath the surface. I blinked, and it was gone. Only the river, still and reflective, remained. I crouched lower, eyes straining. Water lapped softly against the bank, rhythm gentle, almost hypnotic. I could see nothing, and yet I felt it. The presence beneath, patient, deliberate. I reached out, fingertips hovering above the surface. The water shimmered faintly. A ripple passed beneath my hand, though nothing touched it. The dark shape lingered just below, hidden yet undeniable. Silence pressed around me, thick and weighty. The fog curled in slow, deliberate spirals. The river hummed faintly, low and vibrating in my chest. I pulled back, shivering, boots squelching in the mud. The dark shape retreated into the shadows of the water. Ripples faded. The fog thickened, curling across the bank, hiding the river once more. I took a slow step back, feeling the pull of the unseen beneath the water. The chill lingered on my neck and shoulders, the sense of being watched pressing close, patient. I could hear only my own breath and heartbeat, echoing against the river's still, cold presence. The river lay still again, deceptive in its calm. The shape was gone, hidden beneath the black water, and yet I knew it waited, patient, silent, and watching. The fog lay thick along the path. It clung to my skin, cold and damp, curling around my ankles, clinging to my breath. Each step pressed soft into the earth. The fog seemed hum with it, a low, vibrating pulse that settled in my chest. Shapes shifted within the mist. Tall, indistinct, leaning just at the edge of perception. I blinked, and they were gone. Or perhaps they had moved, just out of sight. The hum grew subtly louder. It thrummed along the ground, through the mud and roots, rising to wrap around my ears, making the hairs along my neck stand still and alert. I reached out, fingertips brushing through the fog. Moisture clung to my skin. The shapes loomed closer and vanished again, leaving only the damp cold and the hum vibrating through the forest. I paused, chest tight, feeling the rhythm of the fog beneath my feet. Every inhale tasted of wet moss and river sediment. Every exhale seemed to stir the shapes, making them stretch, shrink, then dissolve. A twig cracked somewhere, soft, distant, though the mist seemed too thick, too still for any movement. I wasn't sure if it was real, or if the fog itself had breathed it into being. The humming followed me, subtle and omnipresent. I stepped carefully, boots soft on the earth, the mist curling up to cloak my ankles again. A shadow leaned just beyond my vision. It held for a moment, then melted into the fog as if it had never been. I walked on, slow, deliberate, feeling the hum vibrating the soles of my feet, through my legs, into my chest. It pressed close, insistent, patient. I thought I saw eyes, pale, reflective, hovering for a second, then gone. Each time I tried to focus, the shapes would shift, dissolving into mist before I could tell if they were near or far. The fog thickened, swirling, curling, making the world feel smaller, narrower, a soft tunnel of damp air and vibrating hum. I breathed carefully, tasting the cold mist. It smelled of wet leaves, moss, and something faintly metallic. Every step seemed both real and imagined. Each movement echoed back as a shadow of itself. A hand-length shadow flickered along the fog ahead. I paused. The hum seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat, soft, insistent, alive. I leaned closer to the shapes, wanted to see, to touch, but they faded into the fog the instant I tried. The forest was silent except for the hum, a pulse through air, earth, and bone. It carried a strange awareness, as though the fog itself was conscious, watching me. I stepped back. The shapes shifted around me. Cold moisture clung to my clothes and hair. And still, the hum resonated, soft, low, impossible to ignore. I didn't look back. The fog held its secrets close. Every shadow, every shifting shape, every vibrating hum pressed into my mind, leaving a weight that lingered long after the mist thinned. The path remained empty. The forest quieted around me. But the humming, subtle and alive, followed, fading only when I left the fog behind. The forest held its breath. Fog clung to the ground, soft and wet, curling around my ankles as I walked. Voices drifted through the mist. Fragments, broken words, too faint to understand, yet familiar, like echoes from a dream I could almost remember. I stopped. The air felt thick, heavy against my skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. A rustle behind a tree made my heart tighten. But when I turned, nothing moved. The whispers shifted around me. Soft syllables stretched across the fog, catching on branches and fading into the damp air. I felt eyes on me, though the mist hid everything from sight. Every step I took pressed soft into the wet forest floor. The fog seemed to pulse, breathing with me, pulling me deeper, as if the forest itself wanted me to stay. A broken twig snapped, close but unseen. My chest tightened. The voices swirled, overlapping, never forming words, never leaving. I reached out, fingertips brushing through the dense fog. The moisture clung to my skin, cold and sticky. The whispers followed my movement, stretching, curling, surrounding me in unseen hands. Shadows lingered at the edges of my vision, thin, stretched, leaning from the fog, but never fully there. Every time I tried to look directly, they dissolved into mist, leaving only the hum of voices behind. I tried to breathe slowly. The scent of wet pine and moss filled my nose. The fog pressed against my face, soft as a hand, yet insistent, alive. Each fragment of speech seemed to echo off invisible walls. I couldn't tell if they were ahead or behind me, closer or further away. The forest seemed to fold around me, a labyrinth of mist and murmurs. I stepped carefully, soft boots pressing into mud. The whispers responded, swirling around me in patterns I couldn't trace. I felt watched, every rustle of leaves like soft footsteps trailing my own. A cold drop of water touched my cheek. I turned sharply. The fog was empty. Only the whispers remained, soft and patient, waiting for me to move deeper. The forest seemed to pulse with life. Branches leaned closer, reaching with shadows and whispers, guiding me, holding me, yet never touching. I tried to call out. My voice swallowed immediately, lost of fog and the fragments of voices that danced around me. I was alone, yet surrounded by echoes of something I could not name. Every step felt heavier. The whispers thickened, circling my legs and ankles, lifting, stretching, folding into the mist. I sensed presence, unseen, patient, aware, moving just beyond sight. The fog shifted again, a pale light glimmering faintly through the trees. Shapes danced in the mist, leaning, stretching. Gone the moment I focused. The voices followed, low, broken, and insistent. I walked on, careful, deliberate, tasting the damp air on my tongue, feeling the moisture soak my hair and clothes. The forest was alive, and I was caught within it. The whispers continued, soft, fragmented, impossible to ignore. Every sense was filled with the forest, sight, touch, smell, and the vibrations of voices that never resolved. It was a world of shadows, of fog, of waiting, patient presence. I didn't stop moving. The fog and whispers surrounded me, soft, insistent, alive. And somewhere, deep within the forest, the fragments of voices seemed to smile, waiting for me to step further, deeper. The forest held me in shadow. Fog curled around tree trunks, soft and damp against my skin. The ground was wet, uneven, smelling of moss and decay. I could feel it. Something behind me, moving without a sound, keeping pace with each careful step. A branch brushed the side of my face. No wind, just the forest pressing closer, the hum of unseen life vibrating in the air. I stopped. Silence answered, but heavier, thick with expectation. A shadow stretched unnaturally across the path, leaning, bending, as if it knew my next move. I exhaled slowly. Cold air hit my lips and nostrils. The earth beneath me pressed softly into my boots. Each step forward was mirrored by nothing visible, yet something followed, patient and aware. The shadows twisted around the trunks. They behaved like shadows should. Edges stretched, folded back, leaned toward me in ways that felt deliberate. A dry leaf skittered across the path. I flinched. A faint rustle answered. No one was there, but the rhythm, it matched my own heartbeat. I moved again, softly, carefully, pressing through the mist. Each footstep whispered against wet soil, and I felt its presence, close enough to breathe, yet impossible to see. Branches brushed my shoulder. I smelled the damp bark and something else, a faint metallic tang. The shadows shifted again, leaning toward me with deliberate patience. I tried to sense distance. Nothing changed. The forest been around me, its shapes alive, responding to me. Every step I took, it followed, silent, calculating. A mist-filled hollow opened ahead. I stepped into it. The shadows lengthened and contracted, like liquid stretching across the ground. The pressure behind me intensified, cold and still, almost breathing against my neck. I dared to glance back. Fog swallowed everything. Only shapes remained, shapes that didn't belong, twisting in ways that made my stomach tighten. I pressed on. The smell of wet leaves and earth filled me. My chest felt tight. The forest pulse matched my own. And still, the silent stalker kept pace. Every tree I passed seemed alive. Branches leaned in subtly, casting shadowed fingers across the path. The fog thickened. The air hummed low, vibrating against my chest. I stopped again, breathed, tried to calm the unease. A shadow lingered just at the edge of vision. It moved independently, leaning toward me and then retreating, always just beyond reach. The forest seemed folding on itself. Whispers of movement and faint hums followed me. I felt eyes where none should exist, watching, waiting. Step by step, I edged forward. The fog clung to my boots, my hands, my hair. Each breath I took was sharp and wet, each heartbeat loud and uneven. The forest pressed in. The shadows followed. Silent, patient, aware. I didn't turn again. Couldn't. The stalker, the mist, the leaning shadows. They were one, and I was alone, moving through a living, breathing presence that never blinked, never faltered, never let me go. The river moved with a slow deliberation. Moonlight traced silver lines along the surface, shimmering across ripples that felt aware. The air smelled wet and cold, mingled with a faint tang of something ancient beneath the water. Mist curled along the banks, hugging the reeds. I crouched closer. The current pulsed like a heartbeat, soft, rhythmic, almost conscious. Each wave rolled with intention, masking shapes beneath that I couldn't fully see. A shadow flickered just under the surface. Not a fish, not a branch. Something else, fluid and dark, slipping away as soon as I focused. I ran my hand through the cold water. It recoiled as though alive, the surface shivering under my touch. Ripples spread outward, swallowing light, dancing with a hum of the unseen. The reeds whispered against each other, soft, secretive. Each sound drew me closer, pulling me forward with a quiet insistence. The fog thickened, wrapping around my arms, my shoulders, weightless and suffocating at once. The water shifted again. A darker shape glided beneath, slower than the current, watching, waiting. I held my breath, the scent of wet earth filling my lungs. A single leaf floated past, tumbling on the surface like a hesitant messenger. It paused, then drifted onward. The river seemed to understand, each movement deliberate, concealing and revealing on its own strange timing. I stepped back onto the bank. My boots pressed into soft mud, slightly warm beneath the pale light. The river pulsed in response, its rhythm echoing inside my chest. I could feel it, like a living presence, ancient, knowing. Shadows under the water twisted, then vanished in a single ripple. The fog whispered across the surface, soft tendrils reaching for my ankles, a cool brush that tingled against my skin. I leaned closer again. The reflection of the moon fractured in the shifting waves. Shapes shimmered, not quite solid, never fully formed. I wanted to look away, but curiosity held me still, my fingers grazing the edge of the river. Something beneath stirred, a swell of water, silent yet urgent. The hum of the river deepened, resonating through mud, stone, and bone. It was alive. It was aware. I imagined eyes beneath the surface, watching me as intently as I watched it. The fog thickened, the reeds bending slightly toward me, as if guiding me into the unknown. The river's heartbeat slowed, then pulsed again. A cold draft rose from the water, trailing across my neck, touching my hair with invisible fingers. I shivered, half from chill, half from something I could not name. I stepped back. The surface settled into a mirrored calm, hiding what lurked beneath, and for a moment, the world felt still. But I knew it wasn't. The river moved with knowledge, watching, waiting, remembering. I inhaled the damp, earthy scent. The hum vibrated through my chest. Every ripple, every shadow was deliberate, and I could not tell where the river ended and whatever watched from beneath began. I finally turned away. The fog lingered, curling at my feet. The river pulsed faintly behind me, as if to remind me that it knew I had been there, and it would remember. The forest was quiet. Thick fog rolled low along the ground, clinging to the roots of the trees. I felt the damp seep into my clothes, the scent of wet leaves and earth heavy in the air. Each step pressed softly into mud, yet the silence felt alive. Then I saw them, eyes, pale and glimmering, floating in the darkness between the trunks. They blinked once, and disappeared. I froze. The hum of the forest felt heavier, like the air itself was watching me breathe. I blinked, and they were gone, but the feeling remained. Something unseen followed, shifting in the shadows, moving with patience and quiet intent. Leaves rustled where there was no wind. A branch creaked high above, yet I sensed a sound closer, pressing against my chest like a soft warning. Another pair of eyes appeared, closer this time. I could see the pale reflection of the moon, shimmering in those unblinking orbs. I looked away, heart thudding against my ribs. When I looked back, they were gone. Only the fog remained, curling around the trunks and underbrush. A faint static whispered in my ears, so subtle It could have been my own breath. I took a cautious step forward. The ground was slick and cold underfoot, mud squishing between my boots. The eyes returned, higher now, between the swaying reeds, then vanished again before I could reach them. Every sense felt sharpened. I could hear the soft padding of my own footsteps, yet something else followed in rhythm, something patient, something unseen. A low vibration passed through the air, like the forest itself was breathing around me. I sensed movement behind every tree, shadows twisting just beyond my sight. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, but the eyes didn't lie. They appeared, blinked, vanished. Watching, waiting. The fog thickened, wrapping around my shoulders, cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of moss and something older. Each step forward was met with a pulse in the silence, a reminder that I was not alone. A rustle at the edge of my vision made me flinch. I turned. Nothing, but the feeling of being followed remained, like a soft pressure on my back, always just out of reach. The eyes appeared one last time, higher and farther, pale dots in the infinite black. They blinked slowly, deliberately, then vanished. The forest fell silent again. No hum, no rustle, only the soft echo of my own breath. But I knew it remained. The watcher was still there, hidden in shadow and fog, patient, unmoving, and always watching. I stepped away from that place, mud squishing under my boots, fog curling around my ankles. Every instinct screamed to look back, but I didn't. The eyes would wait, and when I returned, they would be there again, blinking, vanishing, silent, and eternal. Fog pressed against my skin. Heavy, damp, endless. It filled the air, curling around the trunks, the roots, my shoulders. I could barely see my own hands. Shapes emerged, then vanished half-formed, as if the mist itself was breathing them into being. A whisper brushed my ear. Or was it just the fog moving? It felt like words, fragmented and familiar, slipping away before I could understand. Each step I took sank softly into wet leaves. The earth smelled of moss, decay, and cold water. Footfalls echoed, though I was alone. Or perhaps I wasn't. Eyes watched from the darkness, pale points glimmering just beyond reach. They blinked, vanished, returned, always at the edge of my vision. The fog moved with purpose, shifting, closing in. It carried a hum that vibrated in my chest, like a pulse, slow and deliberate, measuring me, counting me. I tried to call out. My voice swallowed instantly, vanishing into the thick, white silence. Branches scraped together overhead, but the forest seemed still. Yet every sense told me I was surrounded, not by trees, but by something else waiting, patient, hidden. Shapes danced just beyond comprehension. Some were shadows, some were memory, some I could not name. I stopped moving. The mist wrapped tighter. A chill slid along my neck, like breath exhaled just behind me. I shivered, and the fog seemed to pulse in response. The whispers grew, not louder, but nearer, closer in meaning I could not grasp. Each syllable brushed my mind, filling spaces I did not know were empty. I realized I could not escape. Not the fog, not the shapes, not the unseen eyes. A strange calm settled over me. Acceptance, soft and cold, like the mist itself had seeped into my bones. I could hear my own heartbeat, small and fragile against the forest's rhythm. Saw footsteps, or maybe echoes of mine, move through the fog. I did not try to follow them. I did not try to run. The shapes drifted closer, but there was no threat, only presence. Watching, waiting. I breathed. The air was thick with damp, with whispers, with the scent of unseen things moving just beyond the veil. I stood alone, and yet I was not. Something had always been here, and it would remain when I was gone. The fog enveloped me completely. Soft, silent, eternal. The forest held me, cradled me in its quiet, and I felt a strange peace in that solitude. Every rustle, every hum, every blink of unseen eyes was part of the same pulse. I was a note in the forest's long, quiet song, and I did not struggle. I did not fight. I was alone, and that was enough. The fog moved, shifting, breathing. Shapes rose and fell, then vanished. The whispers faded into stillness. I remained, alone in the mist, the forest holding me. the forest never letting go.